So, schönen guten Abend. Herzlich willkommen. Fast ganz voll der Raum, da freuen wir uns immer sehr darüber. Liebe Sophia, liebe Lehrende, liebe Studierende und vor allen Dingen auch liebe Gäste, die von außerhalb kommen, darüber freuen wir uns auch immer sehr, nicht für alle. Ja, herzlich willkommen zum nächsten Architecture Tuesday Abend, an einem weiteren Abend, an dem wir uns mit dem aktuellen und auch hochspannenden Thema, wie ich finde, der neuen Werkzeuge im Anthropozän widmen. Der Ausdruck Anthropozän bedeutet ja oder beschreibt ja den Zustand, falls das einer jetzt immer noch nicht weiß, beziehungsweise das Zeitalter, in dem der Mensch zu einem wichtigsten oder zu einem der wichtigsten Einflussfaktoren auf die biologischen, geologischen und atmosphärischen Prozesse auf der Erde geworden ist. Und was das für Sie als angehende Architektinnen und Architekten oder bereits praktizierende Architektinnen und Architekten bedeutet oder bedeuten wird, versuchen wir ja in dieser Reihe eben darzulegen. Und dazu haben wir, aber Ihre Mutter ist Deutsche, deshalb versteht sie ein bisschen. Vielleicht sollte ich etwas langsamer sprechen. Das ist okay. Also, um dieses Thema zu beleuchten, haben Adria Darawan und Frederik Schnee, die die Reihe hauptverantwortlich kuratierten, eben spannende Persönlichkeiten ausgesucht, sondiert und schließlich zu uns an die Hochschule eingeladen. Und heute begrüßen wir daher eine Architektin, die das Thema aus praktischer Sicht beleuchten wird, Sofia Pia Belenky, von Partnerin bei Caviar. Wird gleich nochmal vorgestellt, deshalb switche ich jetzt auch kurz zum Ablauf. Denn nach mir stellen eben Adria und Frederik nochmal kurz dar, warum wir Sofia ausgesucht haben und Caviar. Und danach freuen wir uns, dass der Jan heute auch aus dem Kollektiv Architecture Tuesday, das ist immer so eine Studentengruppe, die hilft, diese ganze Reihe auf die Beine zu stellen. Heute ist der Jan dran und wird uns Sophias Vita präsentieren. Im Anschluss gibt es wie immer eine Diskussions- und Fragerunde, also die Architektur begleiten und moderieren, aber wir freuen uns immer, wenn auch Sie und ihr da ganz aktiv mitmacht, nutzt das immer. Hier steht jemand, der sehr viel Ahnung hat und natürlich von dem, was er uns präsentiert und deshalb einfach das auch nutzen, den Abend heute hier. Das wäre natürlich immer sehr schön. Ich wurde ein, zwei Mal angesprochen wegen den Architekten, das ist jetzt wirklich was ganz Organisatorisches, aber wegen den AKNW-Anerkennungen und es ist tatsächlich leider immer noch so, wir haben das vor ungefähr 8 Wochen eingereicht und die haben anscheinend so viele Anfragen, dass die mit der Abarbeitung nicht klarkommen. Aber ich glaube, es ist jetzt, seit 8 Jahren mache ich den AT jetzt und seitdem wird die Reihe anerkannt. Deshalb, ich bin guter Dinge, dass es auch dieses Mal anerkannt wird und deshalb einfach vielleicht den Namen, Adresse und alles schon da lassen und dann schicken wir das hinterher. So, jetzt übergebe ich Adria und Frederik und freue mich gleich auf Sophia.
Ja, guten Abend und herzlich willkommen. Wir freuen uns sehr über diejenigen, die heute zum 3. Mal dabei sind und auch über diejenigen, die heute unsere Reihe zum ersten Mal der Reihe beiwohnen. Der Grund, warum wir nacheinander immer wieder die Inhalte vorstellen, ist, weil wir auch auf der Suche nach Definitionen sind für diese Begriffe, so wie es Sabine ging, diese Frage, wovon handelt dieser Begriff des Anthropozäns und welche Werkzeuge sind es, die wir als Architektinnen und Architekten entwickeln müssen, wie wir es auch von einer unserer Gäste gelernt haben, nicht im Anthropozän zu agieren, sondern sogar dieser von Menschen erschaffenen Epoche entgegenzuwirken. Das ist der Gegenstand unserer Diskussion hier. Wir hatten unterschiedliche Fragestellungen gehabt bis jetzt, die einerseits das teilweise gegensätzliche und teilweise kooperierende Verhältnis zwischen Architektur und Technologie behandelt haben. Angefangen hat die Reihe mit einem Vortrag von Marc Angelil aus Zürich, der vor allem ein Bild bemüht hat, das uns sehr begleitet, noch immer, und zwar das des Hauses, also der Erde als Haus, das gepflegt werden muss, und der Werkstatt als wichtigster Raum in einem Gebäude, die Werkstatt, wo die Werkzeuge. Eine Vorstellung, eine wandelnde Ausstellung.
What were the external consequences of it ending up as part of this architectural masterpiece? Who were the bodies that moved the stone? How was the labor compensated? What non-extractive architecture looks to do is to look at the often unseen consequences of our built environment, from their design, construction, and also the decommission of a building. It questions the assumption that buildings should inevitably cause some kind of irreversible damage or depletion somewhere, usually preferably somewhere else. And the best that we can do as architects is limit the damage done. Our goal as architects should not be to simply limit carbon emissions, but instead to come up with an idea of architecture that is not intrinsically dependent on a form of exploitation and extraction. The text I'm going to present now is notes for a manifesto written by my partner of Space Caviar, Joseph Grima, and illustrated by photographs by Armin Linke, Phenomenology of Extractivism, which he published in the book Non-Extractive Architecture. The important waves of technological change are those which alter the balance of power between humans and their habitat. To survive in a hostile and competitive environment, humans developed socio-technical systems, tools that extend their powers both quantitatively and qualitatively. They allowed us to adapt to a wide range of conditions and habitats, and are at the root of our success as a species. Engelbart's law states that the intrinsic rate of improvement in human performance is exponential. Throughout the history of our existence as species, we have kept getting better at getting better. Although progress manifests itself obviously in technology, the ability to improve on improvements resides entirely within the human sphere. It is part of our nature. At first, our tools gave us the means to survive on this planet. Later, they gave us the means to prosper, and ultimately to fundamentally modify our habitats. During the Industrial Revolution, we learned to optimize our tools and our economies to maximize their extractive potential. Unaccustomed to the accelerating effectiveness of our tools, we were unqualified, or perhaps unwilling, to fully consider their compound effect at a systemic level. We now face an evolutionary crisis. We are unable to biologically adapt to our environment at the speed we are able to transform the conditions of life on Earth. Getting better at getting better will not on its own be sufficient. In the face of our accelerating technological supremacy, we can no longer afford to simply ask how much it is possible to extract from our habitat. We are now compelled to ask how much it is reasonable to extract. Put differently, in the face of clear and present danger, we have no choice but to rethink the predatory principles towards habitat and towards each other that modern industrial economies are optimized towards. Non-extractive architecture is an attempt to enact this shift from the possible to the reasonable within the boundaries of design-related industries. In recent decades, environmental discourse has created in the public's mind a broad equivalency between ecological responsibility and energy efficiency. This equivalency is false. While efficiency is necessary, it is not sufficient, and rebuilding efficiently often simply adds to the extractive load rather than decreasing it. The reality is that a far broader and more ambitious reassessment of human activities is urgently needed. In the place of energy efficiency, we propose to consider externalities as a metric of sustainability. Design's externalities do not take a material form. They are as discernible in the procurement of labor as in the production of material resources. The burdens imposed by these externalities are not evenly distributed. They typically affect the weakest strata of community, society, and species. At a local level, the privatization of public space in order to reserve it for exclusive use by the most affluent layers of society imposes a hidden cost on those who have no choice but to give it up. At a macroscopic level, it can be found in the deprivation of resources that impoverish communities lacking the political influence necessary to defend themselves. And then at the planetary level, it can be detected in the exploitation of free market mechanisms to transform resources and labor from the south, while at the same time offshoring the management and disposal of waste that we produce in the north. In this sense, the most inconceivable complex nature of contemporary global supply chains is not accidental. By design, this extreme complexity conceals all traces of the unpaid costs associated with normality are excised, insulating them beneath multiple layers of physical, social, and temporal removal, a crucial precondition for this normality to remain socially acceptable. The design industry's externalities are often concealed by distances, in time rather than in space. Non-extractive architecture must consider the costs not just for the individual and for society, but also for future societies who will live with the consequences of the choices of today's technologically empowered humans. The transition towards a non-extractive approach to design is a function of a larger shift in the scope of economies and should be recognized as an opportunity for increased, not diminished, collective prosperity. Designers have a decisive role to play in envisioning the possibilities of future habitats, and they could start by conceiving alternatives to the radically decentralized geographies of contemporary material production and consumption. In order to achieve this prosperity without externalizing its costs, key phases of the commodity life cycle, its production, consumption, reclamation, disposal, should become a core part of our urban and territorial fabrics. There are many benefits to designing with the goals of urban self-sufficiency, increased reliance on local production, and independence from extended supply chains in mind. First, it makes the trade-offs involved in building, both benefits and costs of sourcing a certain material, for example, visible and palatable to the end user. It vastly reduces the vast web of logistics infrastructure upon which the current system of material procurement depends, which is one of most energy and emissions intensive segments of the global economy. It also encourages a richer diversification of human habitats, bringing them back into dialogue with a local climate and local material environment. The transition towards a non-extractive economy needs the political support of individuals and cannot be carried out individually. It requires policy frameworks that de-incentivize extractivism and its externalities by mandating that costs to the end user amount to a product's true costs, including all social and environmental costs associated with its production. In order to create a level playing field between extractive and non-extractive practices, it is imperative that costs are fully accounted for rather than concealed in a distant time or place. Most of the technologies, techniques, and practices necessary to implement a non-extractive architecture already exist, but cannot compete in a market artificially skewed by predatory attitude toward the environment. Such an economic framework could make them viable. The fundamental principle driving capitalism, perpetual economic growth, is not connected with a long-term collective prosperity, and many possible alternative goals exist. The principle of co-evolution and augmentation of human cognitive wealth and intelligence is one example. Non-extractive architecture is not a dogma and means different things to different people in different places and times. Its definition is a very small part of the collective decision-making process upon which the continued existence of our species on this planet depends. These points were outlined in non-extractive architecture, that they've always been really central to our work at Space Caviar. We presented them first in this book, Non-Extractive Architecture, I'm Designing Without Depletion, Volume 1, which really established a sort of theoretical framework for this new approach to architecture, one that would be based on long-term thinking, material resources, their subsequent landscapes, and introducing community values into the construction industry. I think we all know these kind of figures that today the building and construction industries are responsible for nearly 40% of total carbon emissions produced by humanity. This hunger for non-renewable resources such as sand, water, stone, steel, needed to urbanize the world at such a speed is irreversibly depleting entire regions through violent exploitation that is fundamentally transforming nature into habitats incapable of supporting human and animal life. So what non-extractive architecture is simply, or not simply at all, an attempt to question some of these basic assumptions that underlie our contemporary architectural production from both a material and social perspective, rethinking this construction industry in the hope and also the belief that other and better alternatives exist. We believe that we need to completely rethink the way that we practice and teach architecture. I think today architects and architecture face a dilemma, as in previous times to design and to build more was more than a mere necessity. It was an act of optimism, an expression of a deep belief that we could make the world better. But at the same time, participating in construction almost inevitably means contributing to a process of deep environmental degradation, and the consequences of which we're only beginning to fully understand. And this paradox raises some serious questions about the future of architectural practice and also the future of architectural education. Is architecture intrinsically extractive? Is it predestined to be an instrument of social injustice and an accomplice of human extinction? Is there no alternative to predatory overconsumption of finite resources? Over the past years, we've been producing a collective body of research that looks to these alternatives, which is focused on collecting and documenting case studies from around the world and a network of people that are already working on these ideas of non-extractive architecture. Non-extractive architecture is not something new, it's not something that we came up with, it's probably, one could argue, the oldest form of architecture that exists. And what the project sets out is to investigate these possible alternatives and build upon them and highlight existing models. The network is illustrated here through a growing online directory of practices and ways of practice that's really intended to be downloadable, shareable, widely super accessible. We see the website as a sort of tool that can be used to connect and inspire towards a non-extractive architecture. We're really excited that we're going to share this directory of Design Without Depletion, which is supported by ReArch Institute this June, and it will initially feature over 400 practices from around the world, but the idea is that the website is intended to always be in development and will grow over time. I just want to share with you a couple of the practices and sort of the themes around the website. So building is what we do, it's what defines us as a species, and there's one filter within the website that highlights a series of approaches to building design that traverse history, bridging contemporary architecture and some of the oldest construction technologies known to humans, as the long-term drawbacks of modern miracle materials such as reinforced concrete are very clear. We cannot use anymore. The relevancy of many vernacular techniques is often being rediscovered today and is leading to the emergences of a lot of new approaches and new practices, which are in a way as old as architecture itself. Non-extractive architecture sets out to examine and redefine the public's expectation of the architect and architects' expectations of themselves. What if we understood architecture first and foremost as a form of stewardship over the built and natural environments, investigating material and social dynamics underlying the production of design environment, and encouraging architects to be more responsible and ambitious in their thinking as designers, not as a form maker, but as a custodian of what already exists. A building's footprint is commonly understood in terms of its energy consumption and the emissions involved in building and running it. But architecture's impact on society goes far beyond its energy use. Regardless of their environmental credentials, buildings can unite or divide communities, consolidate or undermine social justice. They can reward or exploit people that construct them, but they can also bring happiness and prosperity to one place, or perhaps unwittingly causing irreparable damage to another. This section of the website looks at architecture's relationship with labor, community, society, investigating works and practices to consider the conditions in which a building is procured as the part of its budget sheet. The labor practices, who builds the architecture as part of the design process. What if we also saw the architecture practice and architecture education as the redesigning of economies to favor integration, circularity, durability, and social resilience through the towns and cities we build? One of the fundamental tenets of capitalism is that prosperity is a function of growth. Translated into practical terms, this generally means that the quest for well-being is dependent on the depletion of finite resources. But is this actually the case? Is it acceptable to prioritize short-term well-being over the rights of our future generations? Buildings are expensive, and the purpose of significant investment architecture requires is generally understood to make the world a better place. But in practical terms, however, the act of building often translates to the depletion of finite resources. As a consequence, architects are increasingly asking themselves, is this necessary or acceptable to prioritize this short-term thinking over the long term? And these projects in this category of the website look at architecture's implication beyond the sort of now and are looking at architecture at the scale of the planet or millennial scales. Almost at the end. What if our material supply chains beyond environments we inhabit were visible and participatory rather than invisible and exploitative? Non-extractive architecture explores the invisible counter landscapes, the supply chains, the submerged economies and labor marketplaces that prop up what we know as the construction industry, the tower and its connected pit, and also the bodies that dug it. Something Joseph sometimes says is, if you're building a house and you're talking to the client and you say, they say, oh, I want to build my house out of concrete. And then you explain to them that they have to dig a hole in their backyard to get the earth that would be needed to make that concrete home. Suddenly their mind maybe changes about what the materials they use. So if we start to make these externalities connected to the architecture we are making closer and more visible and understanding where the materials are coming from and making that distance much shorter, it can really change the way we think about design. The history of architecture and the history of material science are always been very deeply intertwined. The way a community builds is a function of the materials it has access to. In recent times, deep supply chains and breakthroughs in material science have converged to offer designers unprecedented choice in the materials they use. This apparently unlimited choice, however, has come at the expense of unseen costs to the environment, to communities, and to the health of the building's inhabitants. In this section of the website, we explore architectural practices which consider the importance of material choice, its full and spectrum of its consequences. Especially, I would say in this part of the website, are looking at studios and practices that are developing their own materials or doing a lot of testing with local abundant materials. And lastly, do we need more buildings? I think what we're arguing is that our goal as architects is not only to limit carbon emissions, it's to come up with an idea of architecture that is not dependent on any exploitation or extraction of the people, of the resources, of the future. And as the consequences of our built environment and climate emergency are very clear now, we begin to ask ourselves, what is the role of the architect or the architecture schools? How can we, instead of designing new things, reuse what we already have, adapt, and build within existing frameworks? Even as it has become clear that a significant portion of the root of causes of current environmental crisis originate in activities of construction industry, buildings have not stopped. On the contrary, in many instances, it has accelerated, driven by a perceived need to replace the current stock with more energy-efficient activities. This filter of the website highlights the work of practices who disagree with this approach and are choosing to work within existing structures, materials, restoration, maintaining, adapting, and facilitating the reuse. Oh, it's missing part of the sentence. It was, what if we design flows rather than forms? So zero carbon buildings aren't going to be much help to us if they're made out of carbon capturing cross-laminated timber. even if they're made out of carbon capturing cross-laminated timber, if their production is dependent on massive monocultural reforestation that depletes ecosystems or displaces communities, or needs to be hauled across continents. While we're a big fan of cross-laminated timber in my studio, we're looking to find ways to use local wood whenever we use it in a project. So engineering for efficiency is crucial, reuse is crucial, reversibility is crucial, but unless they're all part of a strategic toolbox that operates at a much higher level, at least at an urban scale, we need to think much more ambitiously, because even using good materials is not enough. It won't shift the needle enough. So as architects, I think we need to design more around flows of energy, around flows of material, around flows of economies, rather than form or aesthetic. In doing so, a new aesthetic language will emerge, but I don't think that in architecture practice or in school, we should care as much about what the building looks like. That should be a consequence of all of these other externalities that are taken into consideration. Technological acceleration is a double-edged sword. It can accelerate the process of extraction and depletion or uplift individuals and communities and provide means of empowerment. The practices in this filter work with open systems, new technologies, and software platforms to build strategic solutions, components that are widely interchangeable, new material applications, and objects that allow for infinite adaptation and repair. I think one misconceived thing about the project of non-extractive architecture is that often people say, oh, you're just advocating for only vernacular or only indigenous ways of practicing or old ways of practicing, and in fact that we're actually really excited by new technologies that can transform the way we see labor practices, can transform the ways in which new materials can be developed. This is all part of this big initiative. So no single one of these ideas are the answer, but perhaps through a combination of several of these, or many of these, we can produce an alternative practice of architecture that keeps in mind the materials that we use, their supply chains, the economic policies, the new and old techniques and tools, labor practices, the communities that are a part of it. But all of this has to be in mind when we think about designing the future or designing now. Non-extractive architecture will be a combination of all of these and will be built, as always, from a multiplicity of actors and characters, not a single star architect, but rather a collective community of multidisciplinary thinkers. Thank you. Should we go there? I bring my cup on. I'm a bit tired. Long. It was a lot. Maybe too much. It was a lot. It could have been more. So thank you very much for this very concentrated and also very energizing talk, which did one thing that we are keen to establish also with this series and with further projects about it, spin out a theoretical network, but also a practical network around these questions. And you did both with your talk, and that is most interesting for us to see. You let us look into your tools, like this website-based network, but publications you've done, and we also know that you have other projects that deal with direct adaptation of already built material. And maybe I would start the question round with this last aspect, which was maybe not at the first point included in your talk, but it would be interesting for us
just know how you work, how you are a growing collective, how you put your energy and your power into this diverse project, dealing with networking, traveling around places. You have also a long travel now behind you, and also working on diverse projects. Especially, I would like to ask you about the last open project in Milan, Ancova, and this network, which is also maybe it has similarity to the last project you showed us, a network of platforms existing in the city of Milan, which are activating and adapting to your work.
So I would say that non-extractive architecture, why I presented the sort of theory and the ideas behind it, but not show any of our projects that we're doing, is because non-extractive architecture is really at the heart of everything that we're working on. It's linked very much to Alcova and also to several other projects. Maybe I can just touch on several of them and just tell you a little bit what we're up to. So, as you mentioned, we're a really diverse studio. We work from the scale of research that sometimes turns into books and publications, films, and other times it's about bringing together this ongoing network that is really linked to this website and to the non-extractive architecture team that we're building. It started in Venice, became an initiative in Venice, but it was always part of our studio practice. And in Venice, we invited 11 different researchers from around the world to form this platform with us. And we began to pull together this network. And I would say that Alcova, for example, is a platform for design that was also started around the same time, five years ago or 6 years ago now, in Milan. And what it does is, it was kind of born out of a necessity, actually. We were looking for a studio space. We, as designers, found that there was a real lack or missing place for young designers to show their work and to show their research. If you're a designer, I don't know if you're aware of this big event that happens each year in Milan called Salone del Mobile, but it's usually in a big fair, and it's really boring, and you can only enter if you're a big company with a lot of money, and there's no place for young researchers or designers like ourselves to share what we were doing. So we thought, okay, well, we found this amazing space. It was an old panettone factory, but it was going to be demolished. And so Joseph and Valentina Ciuffi, who founded it together, they said, they had this great idea. Okay, we're going to bring all of our friends there. We'll show how cool it can be if we activate it as a space for design and show the potential of this space, because they were plans to tear it down. So the idea was, if we can show how cool it would be, maybe they won't tear it down and redevelop it as a skyscraper. Unfortunately, we weren't successful, and instead the event was such a success that we completely priced ourselves out of the area even, and there were I think almost 50,000 people that came to the first edition, and it was a huge success, but it formed this design platform which really still looks to activate existing sites around Milan that have been neglected or abandoned, and reactivate those sites for design for this short period of time. But now we're very careful to make sure that they're not sites that have real estate speculation, or that are one of the most recent ones was in an old military hospital of Milan that is still owned by the government, military, and then shortly this year was in Ex Macello, the old meat market slaughterhouse district of Milan, that was already decided for many years that it would be a development by Snowetta. It's actually one that we like the project, so after many conversations with them, we decided to use it in this between the construction phase. We're always looking for an opportunity to develop our research, whether that's through the making of an exhibition, like the last Triennale of Milan. We did an exhibition for Unknown Unknowns, where we decided to make a hole in the earth near the Triennale and mix it with rice waste, because there's a lot of rice that's produced around Milan for its love for risotto. And then we brought in architectural scale 3D printers, and we 3D printed the entire exhibition. And after the exhibition was over, all of that earth and mixed with rice waste just went back into the ground, and there was no waste produced for the exhibition. It was the first time that an exhibition had been printed with architectural scale printers on site, so it was really exciting. So sometimes it manifests as like this platform where we bring together, Alcova brings together a lot of the designers that are part of this non-destructive architecture network. Sometimes we use it as an opportunity to investigate new technologies or new ways of building, even through a small scale of exhibition design. And then other times we're doing projects where, like, you know, there's another festival in Milan called Terraforma, which is a big music festival. It's really fun, and they asked us to design their stage. And we saw that as an opportunity actually to make a forest for them. As we said, you don't really need a stage, but you have no shade where you do the festival. And why don't we think like a little bit longer term? We planned to be here for many years, so we worked with them on a master plan of forest. And then we decided to make the stage actually, since the trees that we planted are not big enough to use the wood yet, it's long term, maybe many years they will be used for future stages, but for now we look to a community that is trying to use all of the wood that was fell during the Maya storm in 2018, which demolished hundreds of hectares of woods, and so we use some of this wood to build collectively the stage. So sometimes it emerges like as a built work.
Great. I was taking a look at my notes. It's yours. You're talking about your collective six of you at the moment.
Yeah,
but the work you're describing it's as the work of hundreds. So how many are you? Or how?
Yeah, we're a very small team. Sometimes it's just been me and Joseph. Sometimes we become like right now we're some of our biggest ever. It's like 8 of us. I would say that whenever we do a project, it becomes this amazing community effort of looking to the community that we're working within. So right now, we're working on the design for the next Sharjah Triennale. I'm going tomorrow to Sharjah to meet with Al who's doing this amazing project, Wetland Labs, and we're going to study how to use sand mixed with natural binding agents to make the pedestal system for the exhibition. And so he's not part of Space Caviar, but he's joining the effort for these moments, and sometimes Alcova becomes this huge community effort with hundreds of people coming together. So.
Thank you for your lecture. Having in mind your interventions in Milano, I would look up the question that you raised in your book on structural architecture. Is a model of prosperity that does not depend on several orders of externality conceivable? And the question is, do we depend on policy frameworks, or could it be like a bottom-up movement?
I think it will have to be a little bit of both. I do think it's possible. I mean, yes, the way we're testing these ideas is at a very small scale, but I think that's sort of the scale that we need to be working at now. I think we need to start looking to the human presence and the human scale and the animal scale of what we're doing, and not. At least that's how I feel comfortable building. I think we need to think of landscapes of planetary scales, but at the same time, like the micro scale of like the actions and how the buildings are being used, and all of these externalities need to become visible. And I think we need more and more to be really multidisciplinary as architects, like study economic frameworks, study policy, make friends with lawyers, bring them into these conversations. Like non-destructive architecture brought in economists, artists, scientists, policymakers, lawyers, all into this conversation, because I think it's a responsibility and it's a job that we all have now, but also, like I was saying, I don't think architecture, we have much bigger problems than the color of a wall and the size of a doorway. I think we need to be thinking at systems, at the system. And if we are going to build something, like, why are we building it? Is it really needed? And how can we make it as responsible as possible using only abundant or local means or what's already available. And, I mean, I think just hearing from you and your colleagues what you're all working on, found a collective to stop the demolition of buildings and talking about even your school building behind that might be torn down to be replaced with something else. Like in a way, maybe we have enough architecture and we just can use what we have and start maintaining and caring for the environment.
For us, it was very important that you touched upon this question about the understanding of architecture generally and work of an architect. And I was wondering, not knowing if you're teaching inside your collective, some of you, or not, if these reflections that you already touched upon on the idea of if not stop building, stopping to think about building as a only as a process of erecting built substance, more of a process of adaptability. And I was wondering if you have any experience in how to translate these issues into teaching forms.
Yeah, I have thought of it. We've done a unit at Architectural Association around these themes, and Joseph is the director of design at Caviar. So we really see that actually there is a lot of hope, and that the future of these ideas has to start from the space of education. And I think that's really promising, and I am really hopeful from what I've seen from the generation that's currently studying. I think there's a new movement, maybe movement isn't the right word, but I feel like that everyone feels this important urgency around these topics and is less interested in working for these like architects and building towers, and like there's a feeling, at least in Milan, in the academic scene there, the students that I meet that are just so excited to be part of a collective effort and to be working on projects that bridge disciplines from art and science and not only architecture, but and I think somehow for me at least the scale of exhibition design and bookmaking and network building feels like I'm not so interested in building buildings myself, and I'm more interested in doing a reuse project or doing a big reuse and renovation of an existing old bank tower in New York, where doing a lot of exhibitions that are temporary but hopefully impactful and things like that. And build the building and the construction of a network, I find is a sort of social form of architecture.
We have the young generation here they're studying right now, and I'm sure questions are already noted on sheets of paper, so I would invite to set questions from the public now. We run around with the mics. We also have a lot of other questions for you. So, are there already some questions for Sofia, please? Okay.
Hi, thank you for seeing the presentation. I'm an Italian architect, which lives in Germany, and I always have to do every day with clients and with real estate developers. And I know very well that for these people, normally architecture is seen as a means to maximize profits. And so I asked myself, because you spoke about exhibition context, about research, but which is your approach? How do you think it's possible to bring this theory also in the normally in the practice, in the everyday practice? How can you relate with clients which wants to invest because they think that building is as a form of investment of especially private developers they want to build need to maximize the profits? Do you think there is an unconscionable a contradiction between things, or there is a possibility to mediate between these two different interests?
I mean, I think it of course depends on the client, but I think it's definitely possible. In my experience, I think it's about presenting this as not an alternative, but as the only solution, and as one that often ends up saving the client money, because I think at least in the ways that we approach architecture, it's looking to the sort of, or the ways that we're approaching either building something new at the scale of the stage, or the scale of a renovation of a building. It's looking at what already exists, what can be reused on the site, and then anything new added is done with such care and looking to what is super locally available. How can we reuse something that I was talking about this recently with Rotom. I was teaching recently in Thailand with them, and they were saying that they work on a lot of buildings with big developers and explaining how actually these ways of reusing what's already existing, implementing really small shifts within the construction process actually become cheaper for them in the end. It saves money and energy. And I think it's a careful, small, step-by-step, small actions, but from my small experience in this, I found that we just stand our ground and say this is what we're interested in doing, at least for exhibition design. When recently I've had conversations, and they're like, oh, do you want to do another topic, or can you propose something different? And for us, this is like the only topic there is, and there's no other alternative, and this is how we want to build, this is how we want to design, and if they want to work with us, this is how we see. But often I think that Joseph calls it in one of his recent essays like cheap architecture. When architecture is done just for the maximization of profits, the cheapness, those costs always exist somewhere else. So there's the cost to the environment, the cost of human labor, those externalities always appear, and it's just about making visible those externalities. And once you are not shipping across the steel from across the side of the world, although maybe it's cheaper than buying it locally, there's the cost on the environment that should also be part of our calculations, I think.
Did you already have some success in this?
Yeah, I mean, the renovation project in New York is going forward, and we're working on a very light renovation that uses basically the building as a construction site, and so activating it slowly. Already we've done events there, even as it's a construction site, and doing very small things of reusing like ceiling tiles in unexpected ways. Very small interventions that use like it was an old office building, so we're transforming the office partitions into different environments for artist studio space and for gallery exhibition space.
Good luck.
Thanks. So we can things like
Hello, and thank you very much for this introductive speech you showed us. And I have two questions. They are more like architecture related, because I'm an architect myself, and I always try to figure out how to plan in the most sustainable way with the most footprint. And there is one thing I'm thinking a lot of, because if you speak about renovation, it's always considered good, because it doesn't cost as many materials. And if you don't use as many materials, you don't have such an impact. On the other hand, if you try to renovate everything, it oftentimes does cost a lot of more work time. And then I figured out that the working time of humans also has a footprint in the products the human has to consume, like meals, like clothes, and other products. Because if you have 1,000 of humans working on this project, they have a footprint, here CO2, or here like in the materials they have to consume. So you have like something like a ratio, how you value it. And the second part is how do you think of life cycle analysis? Because you can value a material in, I think it's like 49 different parameters, like global warming potential, and the water which is used in the product of creating this material. And it is impossible to reach the goal on every of these 49 parameters. You oftentimes only have to reduce your calculations on a few of them, because otherwise it's impossible to keep them all in mind. And yeah, how do you deal with this problem of complexity?
Yeah, I mean, I think exactly your point that building, making a work of architecture is an incredibly complex process and problem, and it will, when we build, if we should build more, it requires a huge team of people that are investigating all of these different things, from the labor practices of who will be building the architecture, making that very visible, making sure that they are compensated and that their time and their energy and their homes are considered into the process of the whole of the building. In addition, the materials that are being used, where are they coming from? What is the supply chains connected to it? What are the landscapes that are connected to it? We need to start thinking about, I don't know, this wood that you see on the table, where did this arrive from? How was it processed? What was the forest that it was cut from? All of the materials that we put into architecture, we just need to start making these externalities from the labor, from the materials, from the time, from everything that goes into making a work of architecture. Like you said, it's incredibly complex, and I think what I'm talking about with the theories and the ideas around non-destructive architecture is, of course, taking something so big, so complex, and trying to say that it's possible. And I know that this is a huge undertaking, and that it just will require a fundamental different way of practicing and studying, where we have to, when we get a brief as a student or as an architect, it's not so much about designing the building anymore. It's about designing how those materials come to it, who are the collectives or bodies that are building it, and it's about all of these externalities, and that has to be factored in price-wise as well, and calculated what's the real price of the building and what is its price on the environment. And I think more than often, the renovation of an existing or the maintenance of an existing structure does have a much lower impact on the communities that build it, on the materials that are used, and we have so much already built in the environment that I think, in a way, as architects, we need to step back from our ego of like building more, but realizing that we can become stewards of the natural environment, stewards and maintenance workers of the already built environment, and maybe that's our role as future architects. I'm not going to be this architect who builds another tower because maybe we don't need it.
The role of architects, of course, is limited. And as architects, students need more of the same. So the pandemic, it's a human caused ecological catastrophe, a problem issue. So what actions could architects or universities, architectures will take to ensure that this affluent and polluting societies take immediate steps to bring about change without needing another pandemic or any other issue to force them to do so.
I don't know, putting the pandemic on top of the architectural as well. It's a lot, but I think in general, for me, what the pandemic showed for me as an architect was the importance of community in architecture space, and that a building is nothing if it's not filled with people, and that not filled with a school is nothing if it's just online on Zoom. And I think that we need more inclusive community spaces. We need more social architectures. Architecture that is open to a public, and I think that's part of what we're working on with Alcova is to how can we give the city back spaces that already exist, and how can we reimagine them just through just not squatting but just through entering them again. And I think that the pandemic made me realize the importance of a community-based practice and working together with other individuals, and that we're nothing if we're not talking with each other and collaborating really interdisciplinary. I don't know about taking on the whole, for me, the design of how we need to be COVID separated, and it was fascinating, I guess, as I watched how these measurement systems were starting to shape how we entered the grocery store and things, but my hope is that they're not here to stay, and other important factors can shape the built environment other than pandemic.
Yeah, of course, because mutual aid societies or any communities take root in this. So this was kind of the bottom line. People were helping each other in a micro scene.
That's true. I think also the design of hospitals is something that's not talked enough about in architecture schools. For me at least, I think hospitals are often the most depressing, sad places that we visit or see, and they have workers that are working incredible long hours, really selflessly, all night in environments with very little natural light, very little social well-being, and I think that could be a space for architects too. Especially we saw in the pandemic how important the hospital was as a site of architecture. That could be something to take away from this.
So one last question. So what's going to be 1 and 2? So there's a 1 and 1. So what?
I think the website is a bit of a tease of it. I mean, we see volume 2 hopefully as a Rolodex, an appendix of all of these practices, all of these ideas, really a little bit more practical. I think volume 1 was this theoretical framework that brought together a lot of our friends of this network of theorists and writers and historians, economists. But volume 2 will be more a practical handbook, who is in my neighborhood that I can call on, where are all the different material reuse centers, Whole Earth catalog, which we've always used as a reference, that was you could figure out how to order the books and how to order the tools, and that our hope is that it would be a sort of appendix that would sit on every architect's desk that could just be a resource, a toolbook, to hopefully inspire and build new works of architecture. And of course, I'm sure some of the practices and the ways of working are not the right answer to every architectural problem. Like I mentioned, cross-laminated timber is a technique that we're excited about in the studio and developing some projects around it. But of course, it makes no sense if it's a cross-laminated timber that's ruining a forest habitat and is being trucked. If I'm getting my timber from Switzerland and bringing it to Milan, then that doesn't work. But if it's part of the design process, like a house that we're working on in upstate New York, was looking at building first planting a forest and really putting into this idea with the client of a really long-term plan for the architecture. And of course, like you said, not every client is just open to imagining first planting a forest and then its house coming later. But this is something that we're interested in, also looking to cross-laminated timbers that don't use glue but are using all wood. So this is what we presented this year at Alcova, was cross-laminated timber only wood dowels. And of course, these things don't make sense unless they're applied at a local scale. And so I think that's for us, it's about reducing the externalities as much as possible, making the ring around each building much tighter, knowing everyone involved in the building process, from the workers to the designers to the policymakers, and making really the materials, especially all those externalities visible. But yeah, volume 2 will hopefully be like a phone book.
And possibly volume 1 would be again going to print, because it's a beautiful book which we're happy to have in the hands, but it's out of print, which is sad.
Yeah, we're working on it. We'd love to reprint it as well.
It's very I have the feeling we are asking questions towards you as to an oracle, because it's very beautiful to hear how you change methods and tools and try different ways to build the sensibility that is sensibility that we all have to develop. And I was listening the other day to a feature about the German critical school of thought, the school, so-called, which was talking about the main thoughts as given as an answer to the crisis of the 20th century. So the answer of the critical school is on the one hand critique and on the other hand reason, and they were talking about the actuality of this critical school today, and the answer was not anymore critique and reason only, but solidarity as the core issue of our way of understanding our work, our way of collaborating, and so on. And listening to you also advocating for a network, a interdisciplinary network, I was wondering if how, and that would be my last question to you as an oracle, how your experience was in questions of involving authorities. One issue that we have, for example, in this initiative we were talking about against the tearing down of buildings is that demolition permits are being signed fast. And it's really difficult to admit to ourselves and also to the ones who want to get involved that this kind of solidarity is maybe the most difficult to reach, the solidarity of the democratic tool that is supposed to be there to the administrative part of the city. And listening to you, you are working also with the city in these existing buildings and so on. So how is your experience in Milan and other places where you've been active? Do you get the authorities also involved in this game of solidarity?
Yeah, I think absolutely they need to be, and I think, like you just said, it's a shift from critique to solidarity, and I think the first volume was really a critique of abstraction, and a lot of the essays were touching on difficult topics and showing the urgency in the current situation, whereas volume 2 and what we're doing with all of our projects is really, I would say, very hopeful and positive, and it's just about showcasing that, look, you don't even need to wonder if this is the right thing to do or if this is a big future idea. Actually, no, there's thousands of offices and practices around the world that are all working on the same topic, and look, they're all doing really great, and they're doing great things. So let's just start amplifying those voices and showcasing these ideas. And once you show that it actually works, like, I mean, Alcova, for example, is such an incredible platform that highlights these voices, and everyone sees that it's a success, and that it's so much more interesting than the status quo. And so the mayor comes, the politicians come, and they all want to be associated with it because everyone likes to be associated with success. And so even if what we're doing doesn't cost or doesn't give them any financial reward, they see the cultural impact and they see the value in that. And I think that's also something really powerful. And it's creating this movement of ideas of people and that realize that there's others that are working on the same topics and that this needs to be a sort of collective effort and that there is a lot of excitement and hope around these ideas. And I think it's not about a critique of extraction, but it's about just showcasing alternatives that already exist and just amplifying them.
For this positive outlook, because it is about keeping hope with us and also working on the issues that we have on the table. On the one hand, because they are urgent, and on the other, because we are responsible to do that. Before we invite you all for a drink before I the door, I would like to give a chance to eventual last questions. Is there any? Thank you. Yes.
We talked about many things that maybe there is enough architecture we can handle and we can stop building that much. And we also teased that with your view of the maybe future architect, what we maybe need or should do. And me as understood and agree. I'd like to know if you personally would like to see or see the need to have one topic or one practice or a single thought maybe that you'd like to see in every university study nowadays, so that the future architects who are sitting here numerous go out on the walls and maybe become part of some collective or initiative, something new with a single thought that you would pressure us to think about.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I don't mean to be like, you're out of architecture school and you, by the way, it's illegal and you cannot build anymore and doom is for you. And like I said, I think there's a lot of ways to practice being an architect. The way I practice is just one of many. And I think there's ways to make buildings or make architecture that's not about constructing, but it's about making networks, it's about making books and talks, but there's also ways of making architecture that it's about construction. And I think for me, the single most thing that frustrates me or like irks me when I go on a jury teach students comes down to the materials that are still being chosen or selected in architectural education practice. When I go to a jury and the student shows me this fantastic building that's all like cool shapes and it's actually a building for the birds, and I'm like, oh, awesome. And I see a model and it's like a white block thing, and I'm like, oh, so what's your building made out of? I'm excited, interested, and then they tell me concrete, and I'm like, no, why? Why concrete? Is there like a concrete factory in the neighborhood of this bird aviary? Like, have you suddenly solved the problem where like the carbon footprint of concrete is miraculous? You made a miracle concrete, which I don't. There's a lot of material testing of like new concretes, which I don't buy. But I think let's just take off the table for all architecture students. Concrete is no longer an option. We cannot build with concrete. So what is left? Now, if I'm going to build an architecture and I'm going to take the responsibility to make something new for the world or for the birds, what is available in my near, like, I don't know, 5 kilometers, 10 kilometers distance? And then you start making rings. What is it a little bit further? What is a little bit further? And those material choices will start to dictate the form and the function of your building. And if we start to build with just what is locally available, I think it will also produce a new form of architecture. I think even if we just remove concrete from the list of material choices, like I mentioned in the lecture, I think we've gotten used to this sort of unlimited choice of any material that we can use in our buildings, and this needs to change because it's not unlimited. There's finite resources. And lastly, like I would just like to, and another example of that is out in Alcova this year, the work of Atelier Lumo was being presented in one of the building halls, and I was bringing in a group from Nike or Hermes or something, like some brand, and they were super excited about the material testing because Atelier Lumo was showing how they were making bioplastics using just vegetable and food waste, and that they were making all of these textiles using bioplastic made from vegetables, but also the salts from the salt fields around Arles in the Camargue region, and they were making rice and corn dividers, all these things. And they were super interested, like, how can we buy this stuff? And the director, Jan Boeing, was like, it's not for sale. That's not how we work. If you're interested in working with us on your building or on your new work of architecture, we would come to you, we would do a mapping of the vicinity of your area where you want to make your project, and then we would develop new materials for you to use for your building that rely on local. And I think that needs to be the shift, where it's not like, I can buy this, I can bring it, and it's good, I'm doing good for the world because it's a plastic wall made from grape waste. But no, you can't have that because you don't have grapes in your backyard. So what is in your backyard? And then let's develop an architecture that's around that. And I just saw their minds shifting, like, oh, we can't have that. Okay, so, and what's really cool is that actually next weekend, or the weekend after next, the 28th, they're opening their new building that they've been developing and designing over the past years with BC architects at BC Materials and Assemble, that only uses exactly that, just uses what's available in the Camargue region to build the entire building, as well as construction waste from the Gary monstrosity that was built nearby. So it's a very interesting project. But yeah, concrete off the table, I think. That's the first step.
It's a very direct and practical solution, and I'm sure it's still contradictive here and there. Thank you very much, Sofia, for coming to us and also sharing the way of work, the questions that you have. What I find very compelling is the fact that Space Caviar introduces itself with a lot of questions, which is a very open way of starting to deal with research. To find ways in reacting to our way of having dealt with material and architecture until now. We're very happy that you have been here, and also thank you for being here tonight, and also for the intriguing questions. We hope to see you in a few weeks, not next week, but I think in 3 weeks. For the next talk by Fakultät, and also Elke Krasny, who will close then our round of search for new tools to get along with the consequences of our work in the Anthropocän. Thank you again. Drinks are in front of the door. You're welcome to